Hello everyone and welcome to the FGP Answers and Discussion Work Plan Alignment and Volunteer Placement session. This is the follow-up live session to the activity that you may have completed in regards to work plan alignment and volunteer placement. I am one of your presenters today. Like Dean said, my name is Jennifer Irwin. I'm a state program specialist in the Ohio State Office. We also have with us Jill Sears, who is a state program specialist in the New Mexico State Office. And moderating for us today will be Sarah Brady, who is a state program specialist in the Ohio State Office as well. So let's talk about the objectives of this session. The reason for this session is to help you evaluate your level of comfort with aligning your work plans and placing your volunteers. So through this session, we will review and answer questions about the activity. We will also answer general questions you may have about performance measures, work plans, or the procedures for FGP. The materials that you will need to help guide you through this session are the activity, which was available after the Overview and Exercise Work Plan Alignment and Volunteer Placement e-course, or was also accessible in the library section of the Resources tab in the virtual conference platform. Now, we understand that some of you may have had some difficulties accessing the Overview e-course. We wanted to let you know that that e-course will be available on demand, and you will have the opportunity to view it if you have not done so already. We apologize for the technical difficulties. There may be some additional difficulties continuing forward until everyone is able to get into the e-course and view it. We had so many people accessing the e-course that it kind of overloaded the system a little bit. If you weren't able to access that or to view the activity, that's fine. We still welcome you to stay and to participate in this conversation. We'll just be reviewing the answers and solutions to that activity. And if you would like to maybe do the activity later and then come back and view this session will be available on demand at a later time. So as Dean pointed out, we will be having a couple of polls that take place during this session. That'll give you an opportunity to participate and to answer some questions. We also have the capability of Q&A, which is available for you to ask questions of us. We will pause a couple of times during the session to review questions and try to answer as many questions as we are able to. If there are questions we aren't able to answer during the session, we will do our best to answer those questions in the FGP forum under the Performance Measures tab. So having said that, we're going to start with our first polling question. We just want to get a sense of how many of you were able to complete the Check Your Understanding Work Plan Alignment and Volunteer Placement activity. So if you wouldn't mind going ahead and answering the poll question, whether you were able to finish the activity or not, if you just let us know so we can kind of see where we're at with all of the attendees, we would appreciate it. We'll give you a couple seconds to go ahead and do that. And like I said, that activity is actually available to you in the library under the FGP tab. So if you don't have that activity in front of you, you may just want to go on over to the library and get a copy of that. Okay, so it looks like many of you weren't able to complete the activity. Like I said before, that's fine. We're still able to walk you through the session. I think it'll give you a good understanding of how to align your work plans and also how to figure out unduplicated volunteers. So moving forward, just a little recap of our agenda for the session. We'll go through a recap of the activity answers. It'll take about 5 minutes. We'll also review questions and answers for each of the sections of the activity. Those sections included aligning work plans, calculating your unduplicated volunteers, as well as completing a supplemental worksheet to help you figure out where you will put unduplicated volunteers for FGP. And then we'll have some time at the end to answer any remaining questions you may have about any of these activities or the FGP performance measures requirements. So with that, I am going to pass the presenter role over to Jill, who will begin our review. Jill?
Thanks, Jen. Hi, everyone. What we'll do is go through the review quickly and then talk about really the process of how we get to some of these answers. So let's look at, so now if everyone, hopefully you'll have the activity book, Check Your Understanding, that Jen was just talking about in front of you. If not, it's definitely worth taking the time to go over and download this because we'll reference this a lot in this session. So even if you haven't completed it, it'll help to be able to follow along. With that being said, our answers, we would start on page 6 looking at our output and outcome answers. So for Work Plan D, we've determined that it's aligned with Output ED2. And what we would have done if we had completed the exercise beforehand was looked through, starting on page 3 and on page 4, we have a quick summary of the available outputs and outcomes for the foster grandparent program. So we would have read through our outputs and outcomes and started looking at our work plans and then looked back at the outputs and outcomes to try and determine which one may or may not fit, keeping in mind that some might not fit. So then we would have determined for this particular work plan that ED2, number of students that completed participation in CNCS-supported K-12 education programs, looks like it aligns. We would have also seen that ED5, ED27, and ED6 may also align in terms of their outcomes. ED5 is the number of students with improved academic performance in literacy and or math. ED27, the number of students in grades K through 12 that participated in the mentoring or tutoring or other education program, including CNCS-supported service learning, who demonstrated improved academic engagement. Or ED6, the number of students that improved their school attendance over the course of the CNCS-supported program's involvement with the student. Then for Work Plan E, we would see that our output would align with ED4A and outcomes ED5 and ED27. Outcomes ED5, we'll kind of go through these quickly. Outcome ED5 is the number of students with improved academic performance in literacy and or math. ED27, again, is the number of students in grades K through 12 that participated in the mentoring or tutoring or other education program, including CNCS-supported service learning, who demonstrated improved academic engagement. And then finally, for Work Plan F, we see that that is aligned with output ED29 and no outcomes. So now, if we would move forward in the activity book, there's on page 11 a section where we would start to calculate the volunteers. So looking at page 10, we have a list of work plans and volunteers that are assigned to each work plan. And from that, we would go through the exercise and eliminate certain volunteers in the unduplicated sense from each work plan to get to the number of unduplicated volunteers. And this is something that Jen is going to talk about in more detail later. So I'll just kind of cruise through these answers. We have 20 unduplicated volunteers. We have 17 unduplicated volunteers in work plans that result in agency-wide outcomes in the education focus areas. So those are work plans D and E. And then finally, we have 85%, which is 17 divided by 20, 85% of our unduplicated volunteers in work plans that are resulting in our agency-wide outcomes in the education focus area. And if we're unfamiliar with the requirements for the foster grandparent program, you can definitely go back to the on-demand overview and review that course to kind of go over the requirements in a bit more detail. Okay, so here is our second polling question. Where would you like us to focus our time today? So we can discuss, what we will discuss today are how to go through the process of aligning your work plans. We'll also look at how to calculate your unduplicated volunteers, and we will look at how to complete the worksheets. And if you don't need more time to review, that's great. We'd like to know that too. Okay. So I'm having trouble seeing the poll results. Thank you. Okay, good. So everyone wants to, there's a great interest in looking at how to align our work plans, and that is where we're headed next. Okay. So in this section, what we are going to do is look at what you're actually going to be doing to determine if and how your existing work plans will align to the new national performance measures for the foster grandparent program. And it's important to remember that you guys have really been doing this for years, and we're just standardizing parts of the work plans. So today what we're going to do is explore the process behind migrating work plans to help give you the tools that you need to make certain decisions about that are involved when you're looking at migrating your work plans. So let's start with Work Plan D. What we can see here in Work Plan D is that it's aligning with Output ED2 as well as aligning with Outputs ED5, ED27, and ED6. And I'm going to keep using these the abbreviated versions of the measures, but please feel free to reference the full performance measure language on pages 3 and 4 in your activity book. So when reading through this, we are seeing that in the service activity, there are certain things that are starting to stick out. We're seeing that the service activity that foster grandparents are focusing on deals with language development and reading, as well as oral language skills, reading, phonics, and defining words. So this is giving us a sense that our foster grandparents are focusing, also we see in there, on K through 5th grade students. So this is helping us sort of narrow down where to start looking in our outputs. So we can see that output K through 12 success, ED2. Oh, there's K through 12 education programs. And then moving on, we see in ED5, there are a number of students with improved academic performance in literacy and or math. So here, we have other considerations that we can take into account. For today, what we're doing is looking at outcome ED5 because we see a clear definition of that in our anticipated outcome as well. We see that our original anticipated outcome is that we are looking at students who are receiving assistance from our foster grandparents to ultimately develop high levels of proficiency in English. So that looks like a pretty good fit. The other thing that we might do at this stage is take a look back at our performance measures instructions to make sure that all of our definitions of literacy and math are aligning with the corporation's definitions that are pretty well defined in the performance measures instructions book. And you can find that also in the library under FGP, back in the FGP library section of the virtual conference, as well as on the National Service Knowledge Network. Other things that you'll want to take into consideration when you're looking at migrating your work plans are things like the data that you're collecting now. Is that, are you having a system in place that is already measuring or getting information back from your students, from your teachers, from the schools themselves that are giving you the data that the output and the outcome are referencing. You might also consider the other things that are important in your communities. Do you have other funders that are contributing to the program, and what kinds of data are they expecting from you? What kinds of impact would they like to be able to see in your programs? You can also consider what you want your program to be known for in your community. So thinking about moving forward, if you are deciding to focus on one outcome instead of all three that are available, how would you like to present the impact in your community as well as to the corporation at a national level? You can choose more than one outcome if that makes sense for your program, but you don't have to. Senior Corps is happy to have you select the one outcome that makes the most sense for your program and report on that. If it makes sense for you to report on additional outcomes for your output, so in this instance, if it makes sense for you to report not only on outcome ED5, but also ED27, then you're welcome to do that. But you don't have to. Okay, so moving on to the next work plan, Work Plan E, we see similarly that our anticipated output has two anticipated outcomes that for this work plan may apply. So in the process of migrating your work plans, you might notice that you're having multiple options for your output, or I'm sorry, for your outcome that you could choose to program in. The other thing that you may notice while you're going through your work plans is that in our new system, your output and outcome and service activity are all predefined. So you'll be selecting from a menu of options that's fixed. What we currently do or have been doing is allow you to write a lot of description in many of these fields. So you may find that you have information currently existing in your service activity that might inform your output or your outcome. So when you're looking at migrating your work plan, you'll want to think about looking at all of the information that's available to you, not simply looking at the output and looking at the new available output and seeing if that is what would fit. You also might find that you need to rework a little bit of your community needs statement to ensure that what you're identifying as your new output and outcome, or your performance measure-based output and outcome, are that your community needs statement is in fact still addressing that. So like I was saying, you might have that information currently in a lot of different areas of your work plan, and this is a great opportunity for you to go back, make sure that when you're selecting your output and your outcome, that your community needs statement is in fact addressing that, and that your service activity, the service activity of your foster grandparents, that all of these things are aligned. Okay. So now we'll look at Work Plan F. We see in Work Plan F that it is not aligned with the agency-wide priority outcomes in the education focus area. It is, though, available for programming in the measures that can make up to 25% of your unduplicated volunteers. So looking back at pages 3 and 4, you'll see that ED29, number of children served in child safety, welfare, and health programs, is available for you to program in up to 25% of your unduplicated volunteers. So, again, if we weren't certain that the definitions would fit with what we have currently, if that would fit in with the definitions in ED29, we could go back and reference the 2013 FGP National Performance Measures Instructions that's available in the virtual conference library as well as on the Knowledge Network. And there what we're doing is really looking through the definitions to make sure that what we think we're measuring is what we're measuring, and what the children that we're serving, that those definitions match up. So again, it's your opportunity really to review what you're currently doing and make sure that you have in place what you want and what you need in order to move into this new system. So this is a great time to sort of evaluate your work plan when you're migrating it, look really finely at all of the detail, and get the systems in place, or make sure that you have done all of those checks so that you can be confident that what you're programming now in your work plans is exactly what you want it to be, and exactly what can match up with the national performance measures requirements for the foster grandparent program. Okay, so on to the next poll. Are there remaining questions that apply on aligning work plans? Select any and all that apply. Okay. And we can pause at this moment to take any questions. So if you have questions that you'd like to submit through the question and answer box on the right-hand side of your screen, please feel free.
At this time, Jill, there are no questions.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, well, I guess we will move on. Jen is going to go over to address the calculating unduplicated volunteers.
Great, thanks, Jill. For those of you that are following along in your activity workbook, I'm going to be looking at page 10. That's where we start the calculating unduplicated volunteers activity. And so let's first go through and just kind of do a quick review of the work plans that were in the activity. So if you recall, work plan D was aligned with an outcome-based work plan as well as work plan E, and work plan F only aligned with an output-based work plan. So we could see from that we would have at least 75% of our unduplicated volunteers placed in work plans D and E, because those are the two that aligned with the national performance measures outcomes. So we want to talk a little bit about how do we determine between work plans D and E which one we will prioritize, or where are we going to put the majority of our volunteers. So there are a few ways for you to be able to do this. Because they both align, you can place the majority of your volunteers within those two work plans, but you might have some volunteers that obviously overlap. We know that you have volunteers that probably have a few assignments and they may be doing several activities, and you count them more than once in different work plans currently. Well, with the new performance measures, as you know, we can only account those volunteers in one work plan. And so in a case like this where you have two work plans that are outcome-based work plans, you might have a volunteer in both work plan D and work plan E, and it's really up to you to decide where exactly you want that volunteer to remain when you put your work plans together for your application. Some ways for you to do that are really just kind of looking at your own sponsoring organization and the mission of your organization. So in this test case, or this sample, we know that the mission of this organization, which is New Horizons, has a lot to do with improving student test scores in reading and math. So the priority should be placed on work plans that highlight improvement of student test scores or highlight helping youth in reading and math with their math skills. Now, by looking at that factor, it kind of just gives us a starting point. If we look at work plans D and E, we see that I believe work plan D is a work plan that really kind of addresses that improving test scores in reading, because there's a large emphasis on improvement in reading, language skills, phonics, and defining words. So for this example, we're going to go ahead and say that work plan D is kind of like our priority work plan or our #1 work plan. And this just gives us that starting place of how we start to eliminate the volunteers that are duplicated in each of these 3 work plans. So if we look at this little kind of notepad, you see we have the 3 work plans laid out in front of us, with each of the volunteers assigned to those work plans. A tip to make it easier to kind of calculate the number of unduplicated volunteers is to start with the work plan that has the least priority. And so in this case, it would be work plan F. Because work plan F is an output-only work plan, it will only count towards the up to 25% requirement. We're going to start there and see if there are any volunteers that are duplicated in work plans E and D. So as you can see, we have Diane, Harold, and Jan, who also appeared in work plans D and E. Since work plan F is a lower priority work plan, we're going to go ahead and start by crossing those 3 volunteers off of that work plan, which will leave us with 3 volunteers in work plan F. Now, if we keep working up the kind of priority level, we'll look at work plan E. In this work plan, you can see that Gail, Harold, and Jan are duplicated volunteers. Of course, in this case, Harold and Jan were also volunteers placed in work plan F, but they were also volunteers placed in work plan B. And since work plan B is our priority or #1 work plan, we want to keep those volunteers in that work plan. So we're going to go ahead and cross off Harold, and we're going to cross off Jan. We also see that Gail is duplicated in work plan D, so we'll cross her off of work plan E since we decided D is our priority work plan. And then we have Shirley, who is also a duplicate volunteer and appears in work plan D. And so that leaves us with 6 volunteers in work plan E and allows us to keep all of our volunteers in work plan D, which, as I've said many times, is considered our priority work plan. So this is how we come up with that number that we have 20 unduplicated volunteers, and that 17 of those volunteers are in our kind of priority or our outcome-based work plans, which will fall into that 75% requirement for the FGP program. So this work plan has 11, this work plan has 6, which obviously equals 17, and it leaves 3 volunteers in work plan F. So I'm going to pause there for a second and see if there's any questions about, let's go back to that slide, see if there's any questions about how we did that, how we crossed off those volunteers. Sarah, do you have any questions in the Q&A?
Not about this specific topic, no.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward because the next thing that we will do is take the performance measures and the volunteers that we have calculated and enter them into the worksheet. So this is what the worksheet looks like. And if you are following along in your activity book, you'll find the worksheets beginning on page 12. And basically, what the worksheet is utilized for is a way for you to kind of map out your work plan. It allows you to input the actual output along with the outcome, if it is an outcome-based work plan. Divide up the service activities. Put your number of unduplicated volunteers, your number of total volunteers, and of course the other information that will be necessary for you to enter into eGrants when you're completing your application. Now if you look here, you'll see that you have one output, which is ED2, but there's several service activities listed. The reason for that is that when you see in eGrants, you have one performance measure, output, but you're able to create several work plans under that one output for each of the different service activities. So if you want to divide up your volunteers who are tutoring in public schools and maybe in faith-based schools, you're able to do that. Just know that it will create a separate work plan for each of those activities. So if we look at this worksheet, you'll see that for this particular measure, ED2, which is work plan D, we have 11 unduplicated volunteers, which is what we figured in our chart. We had a total of 11 volunteers in that work plan. Down here at the bottom, where it says total number of unduplicated volunteers and output outcome pair, we want to put the total number of unduplicated volunteers that we figured, which in this case is 11. And then we want to figure out what the total percentage of volunteers is, because this is going to help us to determine if we're meeting that 75% requirement or if we're in that 25% requirement for FGP. So in this case, we have 11 volunteers, but we have a total of 20 unduplicated volunteers. So if you divide your 11 volunteers within this work plan by 20 total unduplicated volunteers, that is where you get your 55%. And so this will happen with each of your performance measures. And so you'll have another worksheet that you can complete for work plan E, where you will put the output measure. And in that case, you will have the 6 unduplicated volunteers, and your percentage would equal 30%. And then, of course, if we add those two percentages together, it equals 85%. So we're well within the 75% requirement because those are our two outcome-based work plans. So I'm going to do a little poll question here. And I want to know if there are remaining questions about the worksheet. So if you could take a minute and let me know if you still are a little confused about the purpose of the worksheet, if you are confused about maybe when you're going to be using the worksheet, or if you're confused about how you actually fill out the worksheet to help you. If you could just let us know that now in the poll. We'll take a couple seconds here. And once again, I want to reiterate to you, if you have questions and we don't answer them here, then we'll certainly do our best to get them posted in the forum and answer them. Or if you start to go through this activity, maybe you weren't able to complete it ahead of time, and you start to come up with questions, please feel free to post those in the forum as well. We will be periodically checking the forum and trying to respond to all of your questions. Okay, so it looks like the majority of you are still a little bit confused of when the worksheet is used. You're going to use this worksheet when you are doing your application. And so the main purpose of the worksheet, it's not a required document. It's really a tool for you to use to be able to determine the information that you're going to need to enter into eGrants. And fortunately, after this session, there's another live session which will be taking these examples and putting them directly into the eGrants performance measurement module. And I think that will really help clarify to you how these worksheets are used, because all of those fields that are present in these worksheets are corresponding to fields that you will be entering into eGrants when you do your application. How you fill out the worksheet, I can go back for a second here and just kind of highlight these areas again. You know, obviously your community need, which you are all familiar with that. You're choosing one output, and so for this example, work plan D was ED2. And then the information you really need to know is the number of unduplicated volunteers for work plan D. And as I said before, each work plan could potentially have multiple service activities underneath it. So, and this is your choice. If you want to divide up volunteers you have tutoring in public schools and volunteers you have tutoring in faith-based schools. Perhaps you get some type of match money or a grant from somewhere else that maybe needs additional information. You want to keep those volunteers separate. Let's say you have 6 volunteers in public schools and 5 volunteers in faith-based schools. You may want to enter 6 and 5 in these fields. So you still have 11 total volunteers in this work plan B. You've just separated them out by service activity. Your total number of volunteers is the actual total number of volunteers you have working in this work plan. But for figuring out your percentages, you want to use the total number of unduplicated volunteers. So in our examples, we have 20. And that's why we divided 11 by 20 to receive 55%. And I'm hoping, as you work through the activity yourself, and if you go to the eGrant session after this, it'll kind of start to clarify for you a little bit more as to how to use the worksheet and where it's going to be used. So having said that, this just kind of gives you a little snapshot of, where this information is going to be input and what you're going to do with it. In addition to using it to complete your application, you, of course, will need this information for your progress report, which will also be another session tomorrow in the virtual conference. And then this live session at 3 p.m. immediately following this will help to clarify how you take that information from your worksheets and enter it into eGrant. So now that we have gone through the exercise, I'm going to go ahead and pass it back over to Jill, who's going to do our final wrap-up for us. Jill, you want to take it away?
Thanks, Jen. So, I see we have a couple of questions in the, hopefully everyone can hear me a little bit better now. I see we have a couple of questions in the Q&A, which is where we're headed next. So Sarah, would you like to maybe read out a couple of the questions, and then Jen and I can try and field a few of them?
Sure. The first question is more just a housekeeping item for folks.
Great.
Can you guys identify where, if any place, the participants can download a copy of that blank worksheet Jen was talking about?
Yes, the worksheets are actually available. I believe there's blank worksheets that are available in the library of the virtual conference under the FGP tab. But the worksheets are also available on the National Service Knowledge Network. Thank you.
And these other questions are a little more broad. So the first one is, one person indicates that they have nutrition services with their FGP program, and they want to know if those nutrition services would be covered under the health and nutrition category under the new alignment.
So I think a question like that, because there's probably some very specific activities the volunteers are participating in, and I would really encourage you to talk to your state program officer that can help give you training and technical assistance to determine where those activities would fit appropriately.
Okay. And then another question is, how do you address the issues of needing to end volunteer placements because they do not fit with your targeted work plan?
Well, that question also seems pretty broad, and again, without knowing the specifics, it's definitely a good question to take back to your state office to work through the details with them. But I'll also say that you can take a hard look at the performance measures, the FGP performance measures instructions as a good starting place to see what, what is behind the output and outcomes in terms of definitions, to see if what your volunteers are doing are aligned or not. Jen, anything to add to that?
No, that's a great response, and I think I would say the same thing for the person who was having questions about their activities, to definitely reference the FGP performance measures instructions.
Excellent. And then another question is if a program has children that are participating in both reading and math tutoring activities, do they need 2 work plans?
I'll answer that. So if you have, that's a good question, because I think that in a lot of our existing work plans, we have a lot of information that may now be gathered, collected in terms of data together, may be lumped together, and then some parts of what we're doing now may in fact be teased out. So one of the things that you'll want to do when deciding how many work plans to have in your program is to decide if what the service activity is and what your outputs and outcomes, how exactly they align. So you're going to want to take a hard look, again, at the performance measures instructions as well as the language in the outputs and the outcomes themselves. So, with your particular question, it could depend on whether you're looking at a K through 12 success measure or a school readiness measure. So, again, looking really closely at the language that's being used will help walk you down that path, will help you start sort of assessing what you have currently and figuring out how to make that transfer into what our new standardized measures are requesting from you. And of course, after saying all of that, if what you're reading, you're not sure where it's fitting in, or if it fits in, then that's exactly what your state office is there to help you do. So hopefully that helps clarify it a little bit.
Okay, and there's actually just one more question, and I think, Jen, that this will probably be best for you. If you could go back to slide 19 and take a look at the outcome target, people are asking if you could please explain how you came up with the number 7 for the outcome target in this particular example.
Sure. Hey, Jill, do you want to go ahead and take it back to slide 19?
Sure.
And I am going to look at the work plan. And so I think it's probably a little hard to see the work plans that were actually part of the activity booklet because they're teeny tiny, and if you're like me, you can't read that small print. However, the actual work plans, and they look like normal work plans, are available on the in the library of the FGP section. And so I'll talk about this, and you guys might not have these in front of you, but if you have a chance, then this will definitely help clarify. If you read the work plan, if you can print it out from the library, you'll see that the end outcome on the work plan actually says that this program's target is 65% of the students that they serve. And so the number 7 comes from taking 65% of 11, which is the output target, because they were determined to serve 11 students. And so that's just where that number came from.
Thank you, Jen. At this time, there are no further questions for you. Do you guys have any additional comments we have before we wrap up the session?
Sure. The one additional point that I'll make there is that when we're going through and migrating our work plans, often we've used percentages for outcomes in the past, and so now you'll just want to, be careful and make sure that you're looking at what the outcome says, and more often than not, it's asking you for a number of something. So you may have to do a slight adjustment in terms of what you're putting into your work plan and what you're reporting in your PPR to make sure that we're mentally switching from doing percentages to numbers of. And also sometimes our percentages, when you're translating that into a number of something, you might be saying originally 65%, but that might not work out to a whole person. So we have to remember that, if we're counting numbers of people, that saying, let's say 7.6 is, we're going to want to make sure and have whole numbers if we're counting numbers of people. And then finally, in summary, along that line, this is really a great opportunity for you to review closely what you have in your existing work plan and make sure that when you're migrating it, that's what you want in place when you're moving forward. It's your opportunity to think about how you're framing your program and showing your program's impact, not only in your community, but also how you're showing its impact with all of your fellow foster grandparent programs across the country. It's a good time to think about how your community need, if you're telling what the need is in a concise way that also has data supporting what your community need is saying. You'll look at your output instrument and make sure, like I was saying, what you're getting is what what you're actually collecting is what you think you're collecting. And it's a good time to look at your output and outcome targets and make sure that they are representative of what you can reasonably expect in your community with your volunteers, and so on. Also, not to belabor the point, this is something that you've been doing for a number of years, and we're just kind of modifying some of the approach to the way that you're reporting to hopefully simplify it. But you should feel confident that the majority of the foster grandparent program, the requirements are very similar to what you've been doing for years. So, with that being said, Jen, do you have anything else that you want to add? Or?
No, just thank you, everybody, for your attention.
Thanks. And then this will be available on demand shortly. So if you want to go through and do the exercise and then come back, this might, give you a different lens after you've done the exercise. Thanks, everyone.